All right. Okay, cool. Yeah, Ruben, I wanted him to be here, but he couldn't make it because of flight issues, so I still want somebody to hang out with me, so it's my friend Joe. This is the X you're looking for. I'm not going to really explain myself, but you can if you want. If you don't want to, okay.
No.
Okay.
No, I'm good.
Because it's not relevant. And as far as what this talk is about, I will actually get into that later, but first I want to do a lot of foreplay. I like sidetracks. So we'll start this off with the first slide. The intro, we'll do a lot, like I said, here's all the foreplay. So we'll do some philosophical digression. I can't see anybody. I wanted to see a show of hands who's ever played these games here, but whatever. Yeah, okay, I can kind of see that. As a kid, I liked this game. You know, the idea that for the people that haven't played it is you're supposed to get the I'm already doing it wrong. You're supposed to get all the numbers in order is the goal. And when I was a kid, I played with it a lot. I kind of got what I think is pretty good at it, like could probably solve it in about a minute. It's pretty easy. It's not like a Rubik's Cube or anything, which is also not incredibly hard. But you know, you have some strategies towards the last couple rows and all that. But as almost like a pre-hacker as a little kid, I was more interested, after I solved it the right way a few times, I wanted to think about solving it the wrong way a couple of times, see what would happen. And one of the wrong ways is to do 15, 14, 13 and down as opposed to in order. And I found out fairly quickly that you can't do that, which is interesting. I'm working with this formal system that not every theorem is possible to prove, or I guess they could be considered anti-theorems. But and I was like kind of frustrated. I realized when I got to the end, things just weren't working out the same. The patterns I'm normally used to seeing, and even my stepdad, he took the thing and left with it for a little while and came back, and it was in backwards order. And I looked at it and I'm like, BS, you know. So what he ended up doing, although he wasn't being clever, but the meaning of it to me still meant something because I overthink things. But he changed the starting position, or in formal systems, the axiom, the starting rule, and that's what I did here. You actually can't solve this in order. It's randomly generated, so I can refresh it, and it's going to be a different thing every time. But I changed the algorithm for the checking if it's provable or not. So you can solve this one 15, 14, and backwards, but you can't do it in order. And so with this game, only half of the possible combinations of the order of numbers are possible, and the other half are impossible. And I find that interesting. We're in an environment where things work differently. And I'll show a few more examples of that. This is another one. Does anybody know why this Rubik's Cube configuration is impossible? You can shout if anybody knows, but yes, awesome. Yeah, there's two middle blue cubes, impossible. But there's certain patterns that you might be able to run into with this that you wouldn't with the normal Rubik's Cube. And it's another example of like when people, they're so close, they say, to solving the Rubik's Cube, and they're like, if I could just move that one piece, so they take the stickers off and move that one piece to try to give themselves a head start, when they don't realize they changed like the entire universe. You know, like, so they've actually put themselves in a position where it's going to be not just like hard to solve now, but possibly literally impossible to solve. Again, I find that interesting. It's kind of like a hacking, and a lot of hacking that I see isn't really breaking rules. It's more changing the environment or starting positions. This is a good example of changing the environment. This is a chess game that you probably wouldn't see if you start with the main axiom of the typical starting position. I think there's a lot of variations of chess, but this one I think they call it chess 960. The idea of chess 960 is you start with the pawns in the right location, but you randomize the bottom row, and both white and black will match the bottom row in the randomization. So you'll see like the two bishops in the middle match, and like if you look at them, they typically match. And this is a game that arose out of that starting position. It's also interesting because it's games that wouldn't fall into the system, but they're still not uninteresting. Says it in an adventurous kind of way. There's also changing the environment. So though there was changing the starting position, but changing the environment, you might run into other interesting versions of the game. You know, 3D kind of a setup, kind of a Cubert kind of a setup. All the while, I'm actually not that interested in chess, but it's interesting to talk about when talking about formal systems like that. This is another favorite of mine. I don't know. There's like kind of a 23-minute video out there. It's about this impossible Mario world. So it's an environment hack kind of a thing. So I cut it down to my favorite, like less than 50 seconds of it. But the levels are just like nearly impossible. This guy still manages to get through it, but I just cut it down to the parts where he fails. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Try to make it a little bit top heavy because the bottom's hard to see because the chair's up there. So a little blurry too, but I took it off YouTube. So that's the start of the level. That's literally the beginning of the level. And if you haven't seen this, YouTube it later, like impossible Mario level, guy freaks out, whatever, those words should get you there. I love this one.
We really should have turned on the audio commentary because it's awesome.
Did you actually watch it last night? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is really awesome. And the funny thing is this guy actually manages to get through you got to the first level and gave up halfway through the second level, which is this level here. But yeah, it's pretty awesome. I do recommend Googling it, but not enough time here. Oh, let me zoom out here. So another thing is on the idea of wrecking the Earth with the right resonant frequency, kind of like a earthquake machine reference, so that's why there's a picture of Tesla up there. I mean, I'm not really going to get into it, but just want to foreshadow that with a story in this book. Has anybody read or heard of this book? And I can't see hands, but I do see a couple, and that's awesome because honestly, I have never met a single person that has actually read this book, and I try to get all my friends to read this book. And it's like, those of you that have read it, you know it can get kind of heavy, kind of deep, and it's a little bit long, and it takes a little while to read if you really want to get everything out of it. But I've probably learned half the concepts I know about hacking from this book, and it's not even about hacking. It's a way about thinking about formal systems. But like 100 pages in, there's this really cool story, like in the middle of the chapters about it's the tortoise and crab. Kind of this antagonistic thing where there's a record player that's supposed to be super high fidelity, should be able to play any sound. It's important that it's high fidelity because it means it's sufficiently complex, but it's supposed to be able to reproduce any sound. But with the resonant frequency thing, say maybe the horn that the audio is coming out of might have a resonant frequency that could break the horn, or maybe the wood and the record player or whatever. So it means that there are still possibilities that it's not perfect. There's certain things that it can't do. So this is kind of not from the book. This is one of my friends. He drew these pictures up, and some of it I kind of bastardized a little bit just to kind of fit into my format. But so this is the crab handing the tortoise the record. You know, he pulls it out. It has the bad frequency in it, so when he plays it, you know, like that happens, right? So the next iteration of security, they try to make a special record player that has a special needle that does some signature analysis on the record. So if it notices the bad frequencies, either it decides not to play it, or maybe it tries to filter it somehow or whatnot. But still with signature analysis, there's ways that you can defeat signatures, like in a kind of metaphor for AV or IDS. So this red record player either can bypass the filter, or if it can't, there's still a problem. If it decides not to play that audio, then you're still defeating the other goal of having a high fidelity record player that can play all audio. Well, there's some audio it can't reproduce. So he plays the record, you know, that happens again. So one of the solutions to that is to have several different horns. You know, if you give it one record that it is going to ignore for one horn that it can't play on, it'll just switch over dynamically to the other horn that it can play on. But still, you have several tracks on there or several frequencies or whatever, and one of them is bound to hit it. And I mean, this, you know, and then obviously this. But it's a bit of cat and mouse, and the kind of the point is that this is kind of inevitable. No matter what you do, because the system does something, you're going to have a problem, which does translate to security systems.
And if you'll notice, the record kind of does look like chrome, right? Just a little bit.
unintentional. But yeah. So now kind of getting into what this talk is about. And that's getting on lists. And it's kind of like, if you've read the abstract for this, it's kind of the first paragraph. But so when we're being watched and they're looking at signatures of our behavior or whatnot, a lot of us, or I guess I'm not speaking for everybody, but one of the first ideas is to try to avoid getting on those lists, to try to, to not get on the list, to try to do what you can to hide. So like a little image here. You got this guy in a library trying to check out a 2600 magazine, horribly pixelated. So not the most recent issue, but the one before it. And this cartoony FBI guy here holding a little paper saying, this is my list of terrorizers, right? So you could try to avoid checking out 2600 overtly, maybe try to be more covert about it, which is kind of a horrible, like, backing down kind of solution to that. So the theme of this talk, and this is just a metaphor, this isn't specific, but the theme of this talk is to encourage everybody to check out all the bad things. Or not even bad things, but the things that are on the list. And the thing is, if they're trying to signature this kind of list on who might be a terrorist or bad person they're trying to watch, but you're encouraging the good people to check out these marked books, now that data doesn't have as much use, because these aren't terrorists, they're just trolls. So now on to most of the talk. I talked some lower tech first, and then after that, I'll get into some more specific, like, higher tech stuff, like, antivirus, forensics, intrusion detection, which is going to be my favorite part of it. So first, we'll talk about some license plate oddities. And these aren't attacks. These are just, like, again, funny stuff with formal systems or signature-based stuff. I'm sure a lot of you might have seen these pictures. And I captioned it with funny, but not verified to work. And the caveat to that is recently I was in some training for reverse engineering malware or whatever. But one of the guys there worked for law enforcement and said that with the way the system works, it's likely that this could work because it hardly does any sanitizing. It doesn't even check for, like, aspect ratio or anything like that. I don't know. I don't care. It's just like the idea, should make you think that about context, that those readers are looking at the context of a license plate, and that's all they care about, but you can slip in your own context, and such as this. But another thing that's kind of interesting, and there's going to be several of these, but this is a while ago, 1979, there's a guy that had a license plate that said no plate. And in the context of license plate is, this is identification, in essence. But a different context is when police officers in Los Angeles during this time would see a car that had no plates. In the plate section of the form that they were filling out for the violation, they'd literally write in no plate. So this guy got 2,500 violations because of his plate. And, it was stressful for him, but after a while he thought it was cute, so he decided to keep the plate. So then the police or law enforcement actually ended up trying to change it to either missing or none because of this. But again, the cat and mouse. So there was another guy in Marina Del Rey that had a plate that said missing. So this guy specifically had some issues. And then, like, plates that didn't have tags, so the police would write no tag. So this guy here in Delaware got 200 violations for having a plate that said no tag. And then Void, another guy that these are like examples of. It's really funny. And then Unknown, this guy in Westchester. And then some other guy that really liked X's. I didn't come up with this term, but the idea, and this is like something that even kind of hit home for us. We're from Arizona, and I would like to get out, but that's where we're from. For a while, they did the little speed traps on the freeway and a lot of other places, intersections and all that. And when you sped past it, it would take a picture of you, and it would check out your information in the DMV, MVD, and it would say, what do you want?
It's gone now, thankfully.
Yes, it didn't work. Maybe because it's unconstitutional, I don't know. But
oh no, what really happened was they found out that too many people were just plain rejecting it. It's like, I could be driving my dad's car, and my dad would give me shit for it. I'd be driving my dad's car, I'd be speeding on the freeway, they'd send him a ticket in the mail, and my dad would just call up and say, that's not me. and that's as far as it went. And it became too expensive to go to court every single time. And everyone eventually caught on and said, oh, we can just fight it. And then the ticket went nowhere else. So it just wasn't profitable at that point.
And so, but yeah, the attack is you have a target, somebody you don't like, so you spoof their plates somehow, you know, Photoshop, whatever. But you put it on your car, which is illegal, and you know, whatever. But the idea is you pick your target and then you speed through the trap, and guess who gets ticketed? So this is something I think that was pretty big in Maryland. It caught my radar, but it's kind of funny. It's a signature abuse. So now on to something that's kind of interesting, totally inspired by an episode of Off the Hook I listened to about the guy. I forget what state, maybe somewhere in the Midwest, like Ohio or something like that. But the guy wore Google Glass into the theater because obviously you can record a feature-length film with Google Glass. You all know that's kind of not true because of battery life. But he got detained by a couple three-letter agencies, I guess, and that's just ridiculous. But Pirate Eye, the way the technology works, and before I get into that, like I took a screenshot a few months ago when I was researching their site, and at the time, yeah, there's, you know. But yeah, the way the technology works is there's this little 5-inch lens at the top of the theater that scans through like a few seats at a time. It detects lenses and it's supposed to not be, you know, it has tolerance for false positives like people wearing glasses. And then once it detects lenses, it actually sends the picture to a NOC that, like humans that analyze these pictures and try to decide, you know, is this a phone or a camera or something recording the movie? And if the people in the NOC decide, yes, this is probably somebody trying to pirate a movie, then they actually like SMS local law enforcement to go and take the guy down. And I mean, so what I just described here, this is kind of a busy little picture that, whatever, kind of blurry, but really, really blurry guy sitting back here with a phone, you know, whatever. So that's my attack. I call it Spider Eye, you know. And I have it up on my Thingiverse. My handle is XlogicX. Just Google Spider Eye case for Thingiverse. And also I brought them. That's a Spider Eye case. It's just an iPhone case with a lens in it, so it probably, I don't even know if it'd fit an iPhone very well at all. That's not the point. And I felt like a total tool printing up a bunch of these at my local hackerspace, Heatsink Labs, because you know everybody makes iPhone cases. It's whatever. But towards the end of this, like you guys are welcome to come up here and take them. I have about 20 of them up here, so if you want a souvenir, come up and take them. The idea is you put one in a cup holder, in a seat, in the whole theater. And I don't know what movies are playing tonight or tomorrow, but you know, if you guys want to go on a trip. There's one close to the Times Central or Times Square.
Yeah.
Okay, barcode stuff. This is some stuff I played around with like almost a decade ago at work. It's funny, but the idea is that the original idea, and this is kind of playing into Rombaum's first law. If you don't know it, it's when you collect data, it's, I forget the quote, but it's something to the effect of like the data is going to be used in unintended ways after you collect it. But the initial idea is, say you have correlated goods, so hot dogs and buns. If you're a store, you can sell the hot dogs, like put them on sale, advertise that they're on sale, but then maybe jack up the price of the buns kind of covertly. So maybe the customer is still net not saving money. But that could be kind of obvious, you know, hot dogs and buns, we know that's correlated. So statistically, you might want to find out what are correlated goods that aren't so obvious. And this is like, out of the whole useless business school that I went through, one of the funny tidbits that I ran into was this topic, but one of the non-obvious correlated goods that came up was diapers and wine. For some reason, there's actually a positive correlation between diapers and wine. So the idea is you jack up the price of one or the other, and you advertise the other one on sale. So VIP cards, like that's the solution. VIP cards were the way to track statistical correlations between what people are purchasing. So, okay, good.
One point to that is the incentive for these cards has always been you save like 10 cents here, 20 cents here, but you're voluntarily giving them advertising information. It's like they don't have to do any market research. You just They just do it for you. It's free.
And you don't necessarily save because the whole jack up the price of the other one. But yeah, so Rombomb's first law. HSAs were buying this crap up, along with like law enforcement and other people. Like other people want this data. So you can find out. I mean, you could really learn a lot about somebody on their grocery habits, like their hobbies, clothing size, which also tells you other stuff about them. Their diet. If they own a pet, you'll know probably. You know, birth control purchasing, things like that. Like there's sensitive things about what you purchase, and that data is being sold to a lot of people. Good.
And to another point, does anyone remember the recent case of that lady that sued Google over? They found out that she was pregnant, and she started getting adverts for being pregnant. No, wait, that was Target. My mistake. Well, anyway, that's to that point.
Yeah, and actually got a couple more points on that even. But yeah, so insurance claims, like, again, on the same thing, like specific things. Ice cream, it means obesity or diabetes. Processed meats and homogenized milk, this cardiovascular disease. And then cancers with like chemical sweeteners and all that. But like, seriously, you might get rejected for claims because of your shopping preferences. And that's horrible. I don't know if they're still doing that because I think they had a program called Smart Mouth. And I heard about this from one of Rombomb's talks, but I don't know if they're still doing it, but I know they're trying, and that's still pretty sick. Also, and this isn't the only case, but it's been attempted to be used as evidence in court. Like this guy, Robert Rivera, at the Vaughn's grocery store, he slipped on some yogurt that I guess was spilled in the aisle. I mean, it was the store's fault. He got injured. He's in the hospital for about 10 days, and he tried to sue for damages. And I mean, that's not completely unreasonable, I guess. I don't know. Who cares about the politics of that? But point is, the store tried to look into his, data mine his VIP card purchases to try to paint a picture that this guy was buying a lot of alcohol and was a drunk, and that's why he fell. They ultimately didn't use it in court, and my speculation on that is they'd be showing their cards if they did that. If they used that in court, that would really demonstrate to people that they are willing to do this kind of crap. So this isn't a solution to this, just kind of a funny way to troll. This is my VIP card, and notice it ends in 2600, including the checksum. This one in particular, I made sure it works at Safeway specifically. The reason for that is because they're more nationally recognized. The store that a lot of us in Phoenix go to is a store called Fry's, which is a Kroger store, which it also happens to work at, by the way. But I didn't go with that just because you couldn't use it here. And on that, I have a couple hundred of them, so I recommend everybody take one. Let me pull one out. You won't be able to see it from here, but this is the back that I was talking about, and this is the front. And one funny thing that I found out the hard way is Safeway apparently does not do keychain format cards. They do now. So another thing on Thingiverse that I have is a UPC barcode generator. And I know this is like kind of like crazy, like why would we do this? And I'll get into that, like you don't have to. It's just like gimmicky, and I like gimmicky stuff. So it's OpenSCAD format program that you just put in the barcode number and it'll generate the 3D image for you. So you can laser cut it, which is this is an example of. You could 3D print it. I also have a sticker on my phone, which is totally gimmicky. Like I wouldn't even recommend this because it started falling apart after a few weeks. But it worked like for a couple weeks. It's really funny. So if you don't want to do that, there's smartphone apps. There's a couple examples that you could use. Just make sure you use the UPC code from the option if they have more. And on my same Thingiverse list of stuff that I have, I also have a list of barcodes that I would suggest for each store that I could keep regularly updated as long as people comment them. And all I need, if it's a store I don't have, is just the first 6 of 12 digits, because I wrote a Perl script that'll pseudo-randomly generate the last 6 digits, making sure that the last 4 are 2600. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, if you don't want to do that, just print it on a piece of paper, whatever. Just use the point of this is these aren't serialized codes. We're all using the same barcode. We're all the same customer. We're like this 300 strong customer as one. And one funny question that comes up is, what about the reward points or whatever? Fucking use them. Whoever's first, that's the idea. Like seriously, who's to stop you from just generate, you find somebody else's barcode, you generate, how hard is it to generate somebody else's barcode and use their barcode? There's no security to it, that's like not the point. So yeah, this is a community card, that's what this is for. And you know, like I said, I was just saying about the Thingiverse thing, if a barcode gets blacklisted, first of all, I find that to be a success because it's funny, they realized it and they got pissed off. But if it happens, I mean, I have my little Perl script and it's on GitHub, but it'll generate a new barcode, you know. So now onto the technical stuff. And these first two things I'm kind of going to race through because I did talk about some of these tools at Hope 9 with the explosive stego talk. But I'll talk about a little bit of forensic stuff. Scalpel foremost. It just kind of looks for headers and footers. So the idea is you have in green here your file. It's kind of a hex dump of the file, so this is the content and you know the hex of it. But stuff like the file name, what cluster location is, file size, timestamps, that's metadata, that's not part of the file. So Scalpel is not going to carve that part out, it's going to just carve the content out. So that's just the content right there. And this is a busy slide, but this, if you really wanted to know how Scalpel works, this part kind of well, that's stupid. In the middle here, this is like an actual, yeah, that's just the Scalpel signature. So this is like the file type, whether it's case sensitive, how much to carve out if it doesn't have a footer and doesn't know where to stop, and then header, footer. So I jump out here, header, that's what it actually looks for in the file. That's the header without the end bracket there. The footer, and then the content, and then it spits out a serialized file name right there. And that's all it does. So what would that do? Is the idea. It's a fixed amount of data, but it would actually recursively carve out a lot of files because of all the ones inside of that. And it does. It's pretty devastating. So I'm not going to do a live demo of this part. I want to save a little bit of time for live demo for the IDS stuff, but this is me running the script. So Magic Bomb is the script that kind of exploits that. I'm doing a multiplier of 50, generated the payload. And then just to show what the payload looks like, the size of it, it's 17K right there. And then I'm going to run Scalpel on that file. Just keep in mind it's 17K, with 50 files of each carved out. I guess I had to make it obvious. And now I'm going to run a command to see how big the folder is of what it carved out. And it turns out to be 17 megabytes. So 17K payload, and it carves out 17 megabytes. And it's all false positive. They're not actual files. So now we'll look at the audit text file outputs, which will become relevant in a second here. But it gives you all the file names and the length. And it doesn't give you a total, which is kind of sucky. But because of that, my response to that is a Perl script that will just go through and parse that out and sum it all up. Pretty simple Perl script. Because we're going to start doing something that only generates an audit text file instead of actually carving because of how large it's going to get. So we want a way to kind of demonstrate how devastating it is. So just to show on the same audit text file, it's about 16.7 megs is what my Perl script says. So not absolutely accurate, but pretty close. 17 megs flat compared to 16.7 megs. So let's remove that output stuff. And we should be running Scalpel again, just to show there's nothing in there now. With the multiplier of 30,000. That one takes a couple seconds longer. Okay. I think I even sped up the video because it says 90 seconds there. All right, so this one's 10 megabytes as a payload. Now, I'm going to run Scalpel against it, but I'm going to do -P, that's preview mode, so I'm not going to actually carve it out because my hard drive wouldn't even fit the output, is the point of this one. So it's carving, generates the audit text file, finds 30,000 of each. And I'll run that Perl script against it. And it's some processing. It's far worse if you carve 3.7 terabytes. And yeah, I think I highlighted like each little chunk just to demonstrate that, but yeah, whatever, I'll skip that. It's 3.7 terabytes. So conclusion of that, the damage is 17K carves out 17 megs. 13.3 megs, and that would DOS your brain, you know, you're trying to analyze all that. 13 or 10.3 megabytes, that's 3.7 terabytes, might DOS your drive. a 100 megabyte payload, it'll DOS scalpel. Scalpel will just break. I mean, in my example, so you might, if you have a beefier machine, well, maybe it'll eventually get through it, and of course your hard drive is going to fill up before that. Well, do a 1 gig payload, whatever. I mean, it's just a payload. All right, so we're done with that part of it. I'll quickly go through some AV stuff. I also covered HivSneeze in that talk. This is the only slide I have on it. It's just a script that generates files that look like malware to AV products, but isn't. It's just a signature part, and that's all that does. It's a funny troll. Just saturate. You know, it's a signature-based thing. Just saturate the signature-based thing. Give it the X that it's looking for, I guess. And so the next thing I want to talk about is what I call a tumor. This is really interesting. This is really playing with the way that one particular vendor in specific uses the quarantine process. So, what's up, man?
We can't tell you what it is, but it starts with an M and it ends with an E.
So this signature, actually, it's not random binary. It actually says expect us, but the signature is looking for the letter X, which is the second letter there. So like, you know, metaphorically we could say that the letter X is malware. So if it sees a string of binary that has that signature in there, then flag it as malware and quarantine it. So this is kind of the quarantine process. First of all, we have our metadata there. This vendor will take the metadata, make a text file out of it, and it'll have the virus file itself, and it'll XOR both of those files with a key of 6A. And this is what you end up with, is XORed metadata, XORed virus, and it does it in a 7-zip archive container. It doesn't compress it, it's just an archive container. So if you were actually hex dump it, it's still kind of intact. It's XORed, but it's intact. So one thing about, maybe a lot of you know, but talk about that ever so powerful double XOR encryption. If you use the same key twice, it just comes back to its original point. It's kind of like double ROT13. You know, you rotate it 13 characters, you rotate it 13 characters again, you overlap the 26, and you're back to where you started. And that's double XOR, which is crucial for the next point of playing with this quarantine process. So this is the tumor. This would be a tumor in theory, if this were to be a virus signature. So say that is our signature. It detects that, so it has to quarantine it. And then some extra benign data here. So we XOR it, and we end up with this as an output. More bended data because we're going to go through another round of it, but this is our 7-zip container that we talked about before. And it turns out the neutered part of it, it did neuter that part, but when you XORed it, that second part happens to be the signature now. So it's going to get quarantined again. It really will. And we do that, and now that's back to its original. It just keeps going and going, in theory. In theory, it's actually benign in practice. You know, in theory and practice, theory and practice are theory and practice are the same, but in practice they're not, you know, kind of thing. So let's see how much time I have. I kind of want to speed through this just because I want to have enough time for the IDS stuff, but I have the proof of concept video for this. I might actually skip through this. The first part of it, I actually rip out a signature. No, it's just like 4 minutes. That's not so bad. Yeah. I started a little bit late. It feels like I'm going slow when I'm really not. So we're ripping out the clam AV signatures, using a little bit of DD on the signature because it's actually a tar file, but you got to skip the first 512 bytes. You got to change the permissions, and maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger while it runs. Okay. So now we're just going to look at this clam AV signature file in the raw. I'll scroll down quite a bit here just to show that, because these are nonsensical names, but here we go, like anarchy and intermediate or media. Those are all like the equals part of it. After that was kind of ASCII hex, so it's the actual signature. Now I'm just kind of doing a filter for one of the signatures that tends to be really useful for tumorizing for me. Yeah, it's a specific ALBA worm for IRC, which I kind of grep it out. There we go. And then I'm going to highlight that signature. And I'm doing it this way because, like, you can actually use HivSneeze to do this automatically. I updated it a few months ago. But I want to show how you can manually do it. I don't like magic. I hate magic. So I think it's really cool to show you manually how you can create a payload and show it working. So now I'm using XXD to make it binary, like from ASCII to actual binary file. And I'll cat the file out. And it actually looks kind of like a script. That's a hex dump of it. So now this is a Perl one-liner that's going to XOR it with the letter lowercase j, just so you know, in ASCII that's or hex, that's 6A. That's the actual key that this vendor uses. So I'm going to hex dump that. That's the result of that. And side by side, or line by line, the top is XORed, the bottom is the original. So now all we really do is just cat them together. Kind of like how we had those 2 bytes in the previous XOR example for the tumor. Tumor.txt. And hex dumping that, there they are combined. And that's the payload. So now what I'm doing here, this is a VM, so I'm just copying it to the shared drive, and then I flip over to the Windows VM to show it in action. It's hard to see, it's kind of blurry, but I'm copying the tumor file over to the desktop there. And then here in a second, yeah, it's quarantined now in the quarantine folder, this .bup file. Also notice when we come over here, I think I had it expanded out. Yeah, there we go. Come on. All right, it's 3K, which is actually a little bit bigger than that small text file we were looking at. So if I try to access it on Axis, I'm going to just open it. It flips out. It throws an alert. It actually scanned as a virus from the quarantine folder. So I close it. It's actually 6K now. Odd. Metadata. Let's access it again.
So obviously you're going to want to go with a lot bigger file. Otherwise this is going to take a really long time.
But it's a tumor, you know, slow growth. But it's scanning again, though. Every time we access it, and now it's 8K. I don't even plan to like weaponize this or anything, because that's like not interesting to me. As a hacker, what's interesting is just screwing around, right? I don't care about it being damaging. I find this just incredibly interesting. It's just kind of a signature-based system, and we're playing with the way it does its quarantine process and get a weird side effect of it. And I find that kind of interesting. So that's a tumor.
Another point we should say is in this particular AV product, I usually have it set up to do an auto scan of the drive every day at a certain time. So given on an enterprise system, if you have a file, say 1 meg in size, and every day it doubles in size, by the end of the year it's going to fill up the drive. So you can imagine a mass scale attack at an enterprise with just one of these files on each individual system.
So I would say that it doesn't double in size, though, because what makes it grow is actually just the metadata. But it still would grow every time, and if you had enough of them, it'd be pretty. It sucks either way. You get, like, especially with retention policy, you just can't get rid of that file. It's kind of funny. So now the IDS part, my favorite part. First of all, I'll go into like kind of one of those OWASP top 10 things. So I like this one. I have a couple of slides on it, but I will instead just demo this one real quick. So this is our IDS. In this case, it's, we're using a little front end called Snorby. The rule that it fired on is a SQL injection one, possible SQL Server version URI. So if we go down here, this is what it captured, the hex dump of that. And I'll look at the ASCII version real quick because it's a little bit more readable. You know, you have, mostly it's signaturing off of the union select part of it, but then you have some obfuscated stuff there, right? So we're going to go ahead and copy that. And this attack is so obscure. We work, so I don't even want to get into it, but I just want to mention that this could happen. This is the narrative is that you're an analyst. You see this signature. You may not understand as much as you should about SQL injection as this analyst. And you're like, well, I'm pretty sure our company's website doesn't even have a SQL backend for this particular page that it's going off of. So let's just try it out, see what happens. So this is their company's website. You know, I'm a bank. And, you know, this is, you know, not already a customer, sign up now, 4 reasons, with really great reasons. So yeah, we'll try to replay that SQL injection and see what kind of SQL injection attack that might be. So we play the attack. That's not SQL injection. That's actually cross-site scripting. So you instead of a normal vector of cross-site scripting attacks where you send the link in an email or whatever, you're sending it to a different demographic of people through IDS. And it sounds very specific and unlikely to work, but
you'd be surprised how often this works. I'm not trying to put down anyone who works in a security operations department, but there's some pretty stupid people out there, and they will fall for this.
So now my favorite part, it's favorite part because of IDS, but my favorite part because of this tool called 8-Ball. It's not the first tool of its kind. There's been some older tools like Stick and Snot. This one's a little bit different, but it also, mostly it's something that I've used for testing the performance of my own IDS because it has some ways to throttle it a little bit, and you can kind of find like that border of where your IDS is starting to drop packets. It helps you fine tune that. It's kind of like testmyids.com if anybody's been there. It doesn't even, it's a website, but it doesn't even have HTML tags. It's just this string of text here. And the rule that it's triggering on is this rule down here. It's just literally checking for if the packet has UID equals 0 parenthesis root end parenthesis trigger an alert. So that's why that website just has that, and it's that easy. That's kind of a little bit of IDS demystified right there. So let's look at a slightly more complicated rule. It's a lot of crap there. In fact, even at the end, I had a ... Like it's not even the whole rule. So to like unpack that a little bit, this rule is looking for from outside the network on any port to inside your network on web server ports to a web server defined by some variables on your IDS. It also needs to have a awstats.pl in the URI. And there's some regex in there as well that needs to match. So it needs to either have configure, update, or plugin mode, and then it needs an equals, any amount of any characters or none, and then it needs to have any amount of characters surrounded by pipes or system. So could we just send a packet that is a get for /awstats.pl, question configure equals a surrounded by brackets? Answer is yes, we can. So that's that signature that it fired. And down here is that GET request. And this is just totally generated. This wouldn't even attack anything. It really wouldn't even work for what it's looking for. We're just like poking the signature. It's looking for X. We're giving it the X it's looking for. So we automate it. And it takes in a lot of configurations, but the thing that I use for testing performance is it does have a speed setting, so you can kind of throttle it down and watch it go slowly. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you guys want to screw with IDS signatures, but you don't really want to screw around too much with like downloading stuff, all you really have to do is mess with your user agent string in your browser. For example, many IDS products will actually flag you as worm traffic just by setting your user agent string to Internet Exploder. Yes, Internet Exploder.
So I'm going to start this up because time is kind of... I wanted to do a live demo. I can, but I just need to let this go. So I'm running the 8-Ball right now. And it's running through sending all these packets to the IDS. I'll make myself available down in the mezzanine if you want to see this live. Because there's a couple things that could take a while. Like the attack itself, or this thing right here is pretty quick, but then to get my IDS to update and show me that it all hit, like it could take a few minutes, and a few minutes is kind of what I don't have. So, but my favorite thing about this is it actually will do the PCRE or regex stuff as well. So if the rule itself has regex in it, I should say that this is all automated. It will look at a rule file and it'll generate a packet dynamically for each rule. This isn't handcrafted. So you feed it a suricata or a snort rule set, and it'll just generate these packets and send them at the target, lighting up unique several different rules on the IDS. But yeah, with the regex one, or regular expression one, it actually looks at the regular expression and generates text that would match the regular expression. It's like regex porn. So how are we doing on this time on this video? I'm just going to kind of skip along.
5 minutes.
So yeah, this is just showing like this is Snorby, there wasn't anything there, 0, and this is the output. We got like almost 5K different unique events.
And someone has to investigate those.
Yeah. So a couple features I don't have that I'd like to add, but UDP, you can do some spoofing. I don't have that. Maybe pad the packets out, fill up the drive a little bit quicker. Long circuiting, which like if you guys have heard of short circuiting with programming, you have like a lot of OR, like a conditional with a lot of ORs. If the first one is satisfied, you don't look at the rest. Well, you could take advantage of that, do that the other way, where if you have a lot of components of your IDS rules, you could like match all the first components, but not match the last one. So it has to spend more resources like analyzing it, but it doesn't even come into the channel. It doesn't even, like, you don't even see an alert on it. And then REDOS, regex denial of service, which is incredibly interesting. Anyway, that's IDS stuff, and I just kind of want to wrap this up real quick. There's other stuff you can do. Yara, attention deficit disorders, isn't mine, but it's a really cool tool that I think got released during ShmooCon this year. It throws like artifacts into memory, so tools like volatility will, like, if you're like an analyst that doesn't know what you're looking for, that could screw with you. So here's the record player again. The idea is we need to add some security to it, thin thread, right? Trailblazer, turbulence, like all the iterations of this crappy stuff. Add some stellar wind to it, shell trumpet, magic lantern to look at the record player, XQ score, prism, and total information awareness, and all that fucking shit down there, right? I didn't have time to like do visual stuff for the rest of it. So like that's like the environment we work in. And as far as records and music, like we can't listen to these records. It's a lot harder to listen to these records. It's not as high fidelity. It's incredibly complex, but it's not as we can't reproduce every sound, right? So the whole point of this is we encourage you to play these kind of records, right? And we're not the only music producers. We like other remixes and DJs. So that's the point. And if there's any questions, please come up to the microphone. If you have even not just questions, but suggestions, if you have some novel other ideas that I didn't cover, because this is just me. So I'd like to hear it. And now's a good time to come up and take some stuff if you want to. And this is Ruben's stuff, but Joe's the guy with me right now. I can put up your information if you want.
No.
Okay.
That's cool. I prefer not to be flagged.
You don't want to get on a list.
You guys are going to love smart license plates when they can be set to display. We're trying them in Maryland.
Oh, wow.
So, but expired or something like that. Yeah, I just wrote a book. You can find it down the mezzanine about that kind of stuff.
Okay. Cool.
You did a great job up there.
Thank you.
More people should read GEB. I keep getting copies.
Good morning. I'm the MC today temporarily because he's not here. My name is Bill Degnan, and can you hear me okay if I just stand like this? Okay. I'm going to attempt something interesting, I hope, today. It's a discussion about connections and interesting ways of doing research. And my specialty of research is kind of like a technology, classic computing, history, and not necessarily being a fanboy of you know, like a make and model or collecting them like baseball cards, but really I'm a technology expert during the day. I'm a computer programmer and so on, hardware guy during the day for my regular work, and at night I like to kind of go backwards and explore what was, how we got there, and the way things were put together. I've taught computer history at the University of Delaware for a few semesters, and I helped found a group of retro computing hobbyists called the Mid-Atlantic Retro Computing Hobbyists. We have a table downstairs in the mezzanine, and we're going to have some computers set up. They're going to be Apples, but you know, it's still a good introduction to you know, what old computers used to look like and work like. But that's not what my talk's about, and frankly, not really my interest. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore the unlikely connections between well-known milestones and technology, look at culture and seemingly mundane things and events that helped bring those bigger things into being. The importance of these seemingly insignificant sparks would not have been imagined or identified at the time that they made their impact. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a few example connections that I thought were interesting, and we're going to go from there. In my former life, I was a box panel model, and this is a computer that I did some modeling for my Hollywood family, the L-Start Amigo. Has anyone ever had an L-Start Amigo? Of course not. It's made up. But the point is, you throw these kind of things on the internet, and before you know it, people start believing them. I got letters from people talking about their L-Start Amigo, talking about what they, you know, how they remember this kind of thing. And if you look at, you know, as a person who knows about computers, you probably laugh at some of those specs. So people are asking me suspicious questions. Are you sure that it had, you know, 4K of RAM, but 128-bit graphics and so on? So what I have found is Wikipedia and some of the other sites, especially having to do, I don't want to pick just on Apple, but especially Apple and some of the other popular home brands, perpetuate over and over again the same myths about how this happened, how this came about, what Woz said, what Steve Jobs said, what they invented, and all of that. And being, I guess, an antisocial person or whatever, I always fight against those things. I'm always looking for, is that really true? And as a result, I've spent a lot of my own personal time, and you know, I've turned it into a little, you know, I guess a little bit more serious than a hobby. But I've spent a lot of time really getting in there and identifying those things, and really making it, I guess, like a one-man crusade, just to look at the internet and look at the information that's supplied by people who are not verified in the technology area to see if these things really happened the way they say they did. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the story of how a Casio mini calculator led directly to the formation of the software giant Microsoft. So you can see this is a calculator from 1972, and I'm sure this is going to be hopefully news to most of you as to exactly how this happened. So since the turn of the 20th century, people use mechanical calculators like this one to do their science and accounting problems. And you would have this on your desk, and you would add your accounting up. You can see it obviously doesn't have a lot of advanced technology and science functions, but this is what you would have seen in the World War II era. And over time, things got a little bit more advanced. Still mechanical and electrical. But here's a Monroe 8F213 from around 1964, 1965. And you can see there's a lot more places that you can do your math, a lot more precision, but still mechanical. Here's another one. This is a Commodore mini calculator. It's all still mechanical. The readout is on paper. But around 1967, that's when electronic calculators, first using vacuum tubes and transistors, appeared. At the time, these machines were called desktop computers, as you can see. Now, would you have believed that before? But there you go. 1967 May, you see the term desktop computer. So when you look at history, if you put it in today's context, you're making a mistake. You want to look at history from the perspective of the time, not of today's time. And back then, computers had a different meaning and a different word as far as, you know, it was related. Obviously, people know about the term computers referring to women who used to do the math during World War II. Those were computers. So over time, this terminology has evolved. But in 1967, you've got desktop computers are essentially fancy electronic calculators that can maybe do basic rudimentary functions like square root. But the display is in a Nixie tube or other type of actual electronic display. This is a picture here of the first desktop computer, if you want to call it that. Of course, we today would call this just a gigantic calculator. The first one, this is the Model 132 from Frieden, who made the Flexo writer and eventually got bought out by Singer, that could perform a square root calculation. Uses germanium transistors, delayed line memory, cathode ray tube for a display. So it's almost sort of like an oscilloscope sending its display out to the monitor. And here's a picture that I took of one. These are all pictures I mostly took of things that, you know, I've actually seen myself. But you can see it's really awesome as far as how it looks and working with it. But what it would do is it would actually have memory. It actually had the ability to store a few lines of numbers in memory, and you could actually run computations against something that had been entered in previously. So that's a pretty new thing. And over time, you could see Toshiba, the Japanese, entered the market. You've got the 16-digit displays, Nixie tubes, so you're getting more display. You're starting to become compatible with the most advanced mechanical calculators, which are still being sold at this time. So this one is 1969, and this one would have cost $1,400. But what's important here, really, isn't so much that this particular calculator did anything fancy, other than the fact that it's a Japanese calculator. And you're starting to see the Japanese not just make componentry cheaply, but also actually put out their own calculators. And that was in some ways the beginning of the real calculator wars that took flight in the 70s. Here's another one. It's a little bit smaller. This is a Singer calculator from 1971, and it's one of the final desktop calculator footprints. This would have been about the size of the weight of a phone book. So you know, when you're selling this to somebody, you would say, "Oh, this is only as heavy as a phone book." And you know, obviously today that sounds funny, but back then this was cutting edge. What's a phone book? That dates me too. All right, so then all of a sudden, Casio came out with this little itty bitty calculator. This is 1972 August, and the Casio Mini was the first handheld calculator. Over 2 million of these things were sold, and guess how much they cost? $99. So you could see this was a huge impact in the market. And of course it's going to have ripples. And okay, I'm setting you up. What's the connection between Microsoft? Fit in your pocket. It was smaller than a pocket camera. You can see back here you've got 4 AA batteries that you could use to power the thing. Significant improvement. So the Japanese had really come up with something remarkable. And there's the manual. Just like a manual would get for a watch today, you just don't read it. Why? You turn it on, you use it. You don't need to know how to use it. You don't have to learn how to program it. You turn on the calculator and you just use it. Other manufacturers, of course, had to follow suit. On the left, for me anyway, you see the Commodore, which earlier you saw that desktop unit. They got smart. They got the money. They made a small version. Texas Instruments, of course, many of you are probably familiar with that calculator. When I was a kid, I remember we got a calculator. Somebody down the street got one of these calculators, and everyone went to the house and looked at it. And I remember wanting to touch the divide button, and the guy's like, "No, I don't know what that does yet." So it was, you know, you have to understand the times were different. And I remember actually getting in trouble for wanting to divide something, you know. But not everybody was on board. And there were still manufacturers. 2 months before the Casio Mini came out, in June of 1972, a little company called Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems announced their new calculator, KIT, right into the highly competitive desktop calculator market. This is an image from the July 1973 Radio Electronics article, and Ed Roberts is the name of the guy that ran this company. So he got obviously sandbagged by the Casio Mini. And here's a couple of pictures from the Radio Electronics magazine, geared towards hobbyists, geared towards people who want to build the calculator themselves. It was less expensive than $1,400. You could get this thing for $250, but you had to build it yourself. You had to enter in the ROMs, you had to solder it, you had to put the wires together, you had to do all the work yourself. This thing had bridge rectifiers, you can see caps and resistors and so on. So you have a whole schematic that you'd be working from, and this is actually a selling point that you would actually get to do all this. And you can see the input consists of an array of switches housed in a keyboard, and closing one of the switches causes a start signal to be generated in the unit response. Here's a picture of the one that I have, and you can see the complicated wiring, and this is actually a friend of mine was working on this, Bob was working on this to fix it and replace one of the ROMs by building his own PIC chip to replace one of the ROMs. But you can just see that this is definitely not a pocket calculator. And there's the final product. Very good. Okay, so the kit sold for $200, or you could buy it assembled for $250. You compare that to the Casio, $99, and within no time at all, Ed Roberts found his company, MITS, was $300,000 in debt. So Ed decided to take the lesson of Casio and apply it to the new idea that he'd been playing with. He knew that his 1440 calculator could be upgraded to accept up to 256 instructions. Why not make a computer? So he didn't go the make a little kind of calculator route. He went make a computer route. He knew that in the early 70s was, he knew that in his time, the early 70s, useful mini computers were simply too expensive for the average person, but he knew that everybody wanted one. He knew that there was a potential demand, and so he said, what the heck, let's do it. So he called up his friend in Popular Electronics, and the MITS Altair 880 was born. So he told them at the time he had a computer for them. They were thrilled to feature this. They gave him free press. They gave him a free cover. There was a two-part feature, one in January of 1975, and the next was in February of 1975. The Altair was sold only to, early in 1975, was extremely primitive for today's standards, it ran at a minute fraction of today's processor speed. Here's a picture of it. It's about 7 inches by 20 inches. The only way to interface with this thing, though, it was a computer, but you couldn't do anything with it. It had some front panel switches. It had some lights. You could turn it on, but you weren't going to play Pong with it, which was a very popular game at the time. You weren't going to interface it, do word processing. You weren't going to write with it. You were going to barely be able to do machine language programming. And the only way that you could actually interface with this would be to write your own programs with a teletype, punch them to tape, and write your own assembler and write your own compiler and all of that. And if you were into that kind of thing, and I assume that Ed Roberts of MITS figured his calculator making guys would use their new handheld calculators to do the calculations they needed to then create this computer, I suppose. But at least this really kicked off a revolution, but there was a problem. It wasn't really very easy to use, and it wasn't really ready to be mass produced, and it wasn't really for mass market. So the call went out to put together a BASIC. As you know, BASIC would be the holy grail, I suppose, for what eventually became the way that computers would operate. It would be the thing that would make you go better and faster and mass produce and general public access to a computer. Because with BASIC, you could do both calculator functions and so much more. You could write programs, and you could do those kinds of things that people were doing with time-sharing computers and mini computers in the early 70s. So Paul Allen and Bill Gates were both from Seattle, but they were going to Harvard at the time in 1975. And when they learned about the Altair from Popular Electronics article, they decided to make a BASIC for it in 4K, leaving space for, for programs. Here's a picture of what they looked like back then. Bill Gates and Paul Allen called Ed Roberts about hiring them to make Altair BASIC. Paul flew to Albuquerque with a paper tape containing BASIC on it. Paul Allen and Bill Gates got a contract to make BASIC for the MITs, and Microsoft was born. And you can see a quote there. Ed Roberts, we'll give the first guy that that shows up with one. We'll buy the first guy that shows up with one. So basically, they took them up on it, and that's how Microsoft was created. Here's an ASR 33 teletype. Bill Gates and Paul Allen's first commercial software was Microsoft BASIC, which was originally distributed on paper tape for use on this kind of a teletype. The teletype was the I/O device employed by the MITS Altair, and that's how it would have been delivered. So you would have bought your Altair, you would have built it, and then you would have sent away for MITS, and you got a little paper tape that you would be able to load. 20 minutes later, you'd have a ready prompt on your computer. Yeah, you'd have to. You certainly would need to get more than just the RAM and the processor. And just so you know, I do have my original software license for the paper tape software, so nobody can say that I've been ripping them off. And there's the logo. So Microsoft did not invent BASIC or the personal computer, but they were among the first to look at the PC software as a product to be sold and supported and not simply given away for free with the computer. This was a very controversial at the time. You could also say that software piracy owes its foundation to the Altair as well. And although I'm sure it would have been simply happened some other way, computers would have eventually come. The Casio Mini, which helped spur MITS to make the Altair, also therefore holds a special connection to Microsoft as well. For you to decide. Okay, that's my first connection. The second one, let's take a few steps back, a couple years back. What we're looking here on the screen as a mini computer, and what I would like to do is I'd like to build a picture as to how 1970s mini computer field techs invented some of the first microcomputers, predating the Mark 8, the Altair, the IMSI, and the Apple I, really by accident. Now, to start the story off, 60s mini computers like this Digital Equipment Corporation's PDP-8i mostly held an array of had an array of front panels. There were no computer BIOS back then. There was no boot disk. There was no disk at all most of the time. It was just tape or punch cards. There was no computer screens built into the initialization process, and you needed a way to interact with the computer at the machine level. So what the early manufacturers of mini computers did was they put lights on the front of the machines to show things like the accumulator, what instructions were being run, and then gave you a front panel to interact with the computer so that you could, as a technician, kind of get things rolling. Here's another view. This is a Hewlett-Packard HP 1000 mini computer. It's got a different look to it, but it's got the same idea. You would use the front panel to enter the bootstrap commands in the computer by loading in processor instructions to specific locations in memory. So you would flip them in. This was necessary because there was no BIOS, just to tell the computer where the paper tape was so that you could then load in the instructions, so that you could then load BASIC or load whatever programming language you were going to use to actually do your work. This is before that, similarly to the BIOS chip that's on a modern PC. You could use this front panel to check memory values. You could look at memory locations for certain values used to indicate how far along a process had gone and whether it failed or not. You could move the program counter to run from specific locations. You could set memory to change peripherals. You would actually use, the computer would know to look in a certain location of memory to know whether it's saving to a high-speed paper tape or to a teletype and so on. And of course, you could run programs step at a time so you could find failure points. So these front panels were really essential to the operation of the earliest of the computers. But the problem is that the front panels weren't sexy. When you were selling a front paneled system, from the 60s, and you wanted to make your computer look like it was, you know, as you're emerging into the 70s, the manufacturers were beginning to remove the front panels. They were beginning to make it so that computers were supposed to have the cards and the chips and the quote-unquote BIOS in them to start up and at least get you to a glass console prompt, or at least have a teletype say ready or something like that, so you didn't have to enter in all these commands with the front panel. Okay, that makes sense, right? Today, nobody uses a front panel, so why would you want one then? The emergence of this was a logical step. But the problem is how do you support a computer as a technician if you no longer have the front panel to check to see what's wrong with the computer? Okay? You can see the technicians didn't like this. The technicians are the ones that liked the front panels, but it was the users and the sellers and the salesmen and so on that wanted to eliminate them. So what started showing up were these little devices that were being created by different companies. This one is an example of a front panel add-on that IBM used in its IBM 360 era, 370 era systems. And this front panel was used to interface directly into the CPU. It would use the CPU of the system, but it would give the computer the ability to halt, to check memory, to look at things that weren't available if you couldn't get to the glass screen to see and run diagnostics. So this was inserted back into the computer by the technicians who said, well, wait a minute, we can't do our jobs if we can't figure out what's wrong with the computer if you just say it doesn't work. And this, of course, was being done in part because back in those days, the mini computer manufacturers like IBM and Burroughs and DEC and so on, they actually would sell you the computer and the software and the technician. You paid for that on a monthly or yearly or whatever basis. It was rare for a company to actually purchase a computer outright because they were so expensive. So this was actually a cost-saving measure that was put into play by the technicians because they didn't want to have to swap out an entire computer to figure out which component was bad. So that's what this is all about. Here's another example. This is from a Burroughs B7800, and this is a diagnostic panel for one of those. You could see, I think you can see on the screen, you can see at the very end, you can see how this thing was actually slid into a backplane slot. It had an LCD 4-digit output display, and it used to display two 2-digit machine instructions or one 4-digit hex value. And you can see those are 16 switches. So you can see that it was configured to work with the kind of computers back in the day. Okay, so very exciting. What does this have to do with inventing computers? So about at the same time, microcomputers were invented. And here's a cover of Electrical Design News, a 1975 best of issue. In other words, the articles written in this were written earlier, but this is like a reprint. And I was intrigued to learn about, there were many lesser known microcomputers from 1974 and 1975, and so I spent some time doing a little research. Again, the theme here, you read about the pantheon of computers. You've got your this, you got your this, you got your this, you got this. It's never that simple. Just like human evolution, it's not that simple. There wasn't a Neanderthal, then a Homo sapiens, and so on. The same goes with computers. There wasn't just this computer, then this one came out, and everyone just threw the one away that they had and made another one. There were people who didn't necessarily take the consumer route. They didn't necessarily take the advertising route. They just made a computer. So there's a lot of that kind of activity going on, and amongst those people were the real engineers who were taking these early micro processors and making computers out of them. Never publicized, never talked about in Byte magazine or Kilobaud or some of these other popular kinds of magazines. These are the heavy-duty engineers, and this one on the screen right here is RCA's COSMAC system. This was built. 72, 73 or something like that. And it was a full-blown computer. But it's really pretty much unknown because it wasn't sold to consumers, and it probably cost about, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000. But you could boot the thing up, and you could get to a teletype, and you could get to a prompt, and it was ready to go. But this was the one that really got me interested in the subject. This is called the Process Computer Systems MicroPack 80. The original lead engineer of the MicroPack 80 computer, his name is Rick Barnich. and I tracked him down. He's still alive. Well, not that he's that old, I'm sure, but I tracked him down for an informative phone interview. And this is really what really consolidated my understanding of where some of these really early PCs came from. He makes a reasonable case that this was the first commercial computer that used the Intel 8080 microprocessor as a CPU. The micropack was originally designed and built to be used as an interface for the HP 2000 series, the DEC PDP, and the Data General mini computers using the mini computer as the CPU. But Rick and his team realized that their micropack could be used as a standalone computer if they had the appropriate microprocessor. So what happened here is that was a company who was doing the servicing of mini computers, using front panels, and they said, why don't we just throw a microprocessor on one of our diagnostic front panels and turn it into a computer? And that's what this is. You can see the front panel is up at the top. This is the only known picture of this thing that I've ever found. It doesn't exist anywhere on the web. And the only reason I found this was just by looking through the phone, not the phone book, looking online. I found, maybe I used the phone book, but just tracking this guy down relentlessly, finding somebody named Rick Barnick that would answer my questions and seemed to know what I was talking about. But eventually, he did confirm this story. So what they did was they made this computer. They finished the whole thing before the 8080 processor came out. They contacted Intel. They said they'd like a processor. They already had the engineering specifications for the prototype version of the 8080, which was called the S910, and they built the whole thing around it, and they waited for Intel to finally ship them in early 1974 this chip. And they took the prototype chip, they put it in, it worked. Very little voltage changes. Rick said they had to make a minor voltage change to something, but other than that, the thing worked perfectly. So, very interesting that the contribution that the technicians made and the connection between how technicians who were just doing their diagnostic job with computers that didn't have front panels, and how that led to the creation of, accidentally, microcomputers. You can see here some of the specs. Front panel, teletype I/O storage, built-in ROM, finished in December of '73, and then sold in early '74. If you recall, the Altair was sold in January of 1975, so this is almost a year before that. Okay. Now, there's one more connection for you. Let me see, how am I doing on time? Pretty good, okay. This one's a little bit more fun, but the point here is that I really want to illustrate that you don't want to get your knowledge and your information from Wikipedia. And it's really important that you really go and dive into whatever it is you're interested in yourself. Well, I suppose then that's all I'd be doing all day, I suppose. But what I will do, and I do is publicize this information on my website, which is called vintagecomputer.org. If you want to write that down, I didn't put it anywhere to publicize myself, but that's where I do all this work. Vintagecomputer.net and vintagecomputer.org both point to the same site. I have not publicized this anywhere. This information that you're about to hear has never been heard. So this is the first time knowledge for everybody. But really, it's a little bit of a stretch in that it does have to do with technology, but it's more of a just for fun. I have nothing against the people from Ghostbusters or Dan Aykroyd or any of those, but what I am going to do is I'm going to show you how I used my investigations to determine that indeed Dan Aykroyd may not have actually written the story Ghostbusters, and who actually did. Ghostbusters story was nominated for Oscars. This is the 30th anniversary this summer of the Ghostbusters movie. It's considered to be the 28th of the funniest movies of all time, according to the American Film Institute. And you know, personally, I can't remember when I've actually last watched this movie, but it definitely is a classic movie, and it is pretty much in our popular culture. Who are you going to call and all that stuff. So Wikipedia says that Ghostbusters was written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, and you can see them in the slide on the screen. It also stars Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ramis, and were both in New York City, and they started a ghost catching business. And here's some other stars from the film. You've got Sigourney Weaver. You've got the EPA inspector who tried to shut them down, and so on. And so what? Who cares? It's just a movie, right? But this again is a story about how the Dan Aykroyd wanted to publicize his knowledge of science and so on. He wanted to kind of make himself look like he was sort of like a quirky genius kind of person. And the story about traveling through time and space and other dimensions was right up his alley. When you look into the Ghostbusters story, in particular the term ectoplasm, which is also referred to as ghost slime, an ectoplasmic residue, when you're slimed, it's a substance that comes from ghosts and other outwardly beings. So when you would go after one of these ghosts, you would get slimed as they would go through you. Ectoplasm is a slimy, greenish substance, but sometimes just a green glow. And all ghosts and paranormal activities are considered to be ectoplasmic by Ghostbusters. Ectoplasmic is the state of being which is the outwardly creatures and ghosts and demons in order to enter our realm. They have to be ectoplasmic in order to come into the earth. The word ectomobile was only used in the song Cleaning Up the Town from the film's soundtrack, but everybody knows this thing as the hearse that the Ghostbusters rode around in to chase after the ectoplasmic ghosts in New York City. This is a 1959 Cadillac Miller Meteor limo-style combination car. It's like an ambulance that was converted. And why am I saying all this stuff? Just hold on. It's a little bit of a stretch, but you'll see. Okay, so we've got the ectoplasm, we got the green slime, we've got the 1959 Ghostbusters ectomobile, we've got the whole concept of going after them with the guns that would shoot the rays at them and that would disturb the ectoplasm and then capture them. By capturing the ectoplasm, putting them in a box and ridding the world of these ghosts for whatever reason. Okay, now, got me thinking. One of the things about collecting, not collecting, but one of the things about my hobby, I guess you call it, is when I go to a person's house, I'll get a call. They'll say, somebody or other just died, or I got to get this junk out of my house, or whatever. I would go to a house and I'd bring a truck or whatever, and I'd unload whatever crazy computer collection some guy had for 50 years in his house. And then I would take those items and I'd look through them all. I'd catalog them as a collection. Because I really wanted to understand, what was this person doing with them? What magazines was this person reading when he was working on this? And what was the context behind this? What did this guy do for a living? And so on. Clean these items up. And then very often what I would do is I would catalog them, and then I would just take them to the Mid-Atlantic Retro Computing Hobbyists Museum in Wall Township, which isn't that far from here, and that's where a lot of this stuff now exists. But in my travels, I came upon this comic book. And if you look at it, this is a 1963, 1964 comic book. What does that look like to you? Does that guy look like he's doing some ghost busting? It does to me, doesn't it? So I started saying, what's going on here? Why? I don't know. But I felt as if there was a story to uncover. So this is the Adventures into the Unknown, and this is a story. This is basically how, by saving this stuff and holding on to it, you never know. Really, my interest in this was looking for computer ads like the Geniac and the Brainiac and all. But this cover really struck me, and I just kind of put it aside and said, this is interesting. But eventually, I read into it a little bit. And the more I read, the more I started thinking, hey, this is the Ghostbusters story. You've got Ghost Killer Who Vanished. You can see the original author is Kureto Osaki. There's the only picture I could find of the guy right there. I don't think that's real, though. I think that's a self-portrait. But this was written in 1963. It was submitted for publication in late 1963, appeared in early 1964 on newsstands. But just remember that. We're talking about 1963. There is a Ghostbusters story. They're calling it Ghost Killer, but essentially it's a Ghostbusters story. You can see things like bombardment by a combination of infrared and gamma rays. This is Dr. Johnson. He's working on his ectoplasm detector and ectoplasm blaster devices. He tells the academia, just like they did in, just like they were doing in the Ghostbusters story. Ghosts consist of an emanation called ectoplasm, rays of high penetrating power. So he's telling this to the academic community. He shows them the detector that he invented, and of course they laugh at him. Now, who was laughed at in Ghostbusters? Bill Murray. And all of a sudden the story is getting a little bit more serious, isn't it? Yes, but just like all academics that get laughed out of their institutions, there's always somebody in the movie especially who's willing to hire you and believes that your crazy story will actually work. So our Dr. or Professor Johnson starts a small business in the field of using this device to track down ghosts. And just as with the Ghostbusters, the device is tested in the field. Ghost registering let's see here, I'm trying to read what that says. Oh, it's registering more and more as if the ghost had come out of the pictures. You can see the device, and you can see him shooting it. Okay? So this is really starting to make a case of that the Ghostbuster story came from this comic book. That's reasonable to say, right? But let's not get too hasty. Okay? Let's just assume, this is just an amazing coincidence. Let's just assume, for right now, that we're not proving anything other than the fact that two people came up with a very similar story. Okay? So I decided to push further. And what I did was I took a look at my hacked version of the Ghostbusters video game that came out in 1984. Here's a picture of the screen. Now, here's something interesting about this story. What Activision had done was they were given the job of making this game at the same time this movie was being produced. And like most comedian-type movies, they have a general script that they work with, and then as they make the movie, they kind of change things around a little bit. But the Activision people got the original script, the original information, and they incorporated that into their game, okay? So in parallel, you've got one Activision team making the game, and then you've got the movie actually being produced. So, those are occurring in parallel. Now, once you've loaded this game up, guess what? You have a choice of an unspecified subcompact, an unspecified station wagon, an unspecified high-performance sports car, or a 1963 hearse, which looked exactly like the Ecto-1. Coincidence? I think not. So again, by dipping into these crazy alleys, taking them, you should do it. It's fun, and you never know what you're going to find, right? So you build your car. Note how it says 1963 hearse. You basically you're using this hearse to travel throughout the game. Here's the game board itself. What you would do here is you would use your joystick and you would find where the ghosts are, and you would move your cursor to the like those yellow ghosts, and then you would hit the button, and then you would go on the road in your in your hearse, traveling down the road, and you could move it, go from left to right, and you could run over ghosts with it if they happen to show up on the screen. It's pretty advanced for a game in 1984. And then finally you would show up, you would lay down your ecto traps and so forth, and you would use these to capture the ghosts and all that. So this basic story was put together. The only real difference is that for whatever reason, In the movie, they chose to use a 1959 hearse, but in the video, they used the 1963 hearse. Were they feeling guilty? Probably not. Were they trying to hide something? Probably not. Did they actually come up with this by reading the magazine? Well, I think it's reasonable to say that they had a copy of this magazine lying around when they were doing their work. So Activision was building the game in parallel with the movie based on the unfinished script. The comic book story is from 1963. The original Ecto-1 must have been described as a 1963 hearse in that documentation, which matches the comic book date. So the publication of the date matches the year of the hearse. And the movie producers could not find a suitable 1963 hearse, so they just settled on whatever they could find in 1959. So my question for you, whoa, what just happened? Oh. 1 second. Can you see that okay now? Okay. All right, so the question I have for you then is, Kuro Osaki, who are you going to call? I say he should call a copyright lawyer. It's reasonable enough. So if there's any lawyers in the house, go get them. Actually, honestly, I have no idea if the guy's still alive. I don't know. I could not find him anywhere. Another interesting thing about this is I searched the web. This artist has credits for dozens and dozens of comic books that he's made, covers and so on. There's not one copy anywhere on the web, in Google, of the cover that I showed you about the ghost killers comic book cover. Isn't that kind of strange? So it really makes you wonder if there actually were lawyers and people who actually knew all this stuff and actually suppressed this information. Well, the truth must be known. And I just think that, this is a really interesting story. I'm happy to share it with you. And, really all I can tell you is that next time you watch this movie, which is the 30th anniversary, spread the word. See what happens. You never know. You never know. I'd love for this guy, Karato Osaki, to get credit. My guess is that he's either not with us anymore, or he's just didn't know what Ghostbusters was. It seems almost impossible for me to imagine unless there's hush money involved. I think there's a conspiracy, and that's really just making me think more about almost everything now. So if Ghostbusters isn't real, is America real? I can feel it's all sinking into you right now. So that actually, I was actually going to talk about one other thing, but I was afraid I was going to run out of time. So that's really the end of my talk. But I'm certainly happy to answer any questions about vintage computing, anything that has to do with computers, how the more details about the connections between these front panels, about the origin of calculators, and of course about the Ghostbusters story.
Hi, you had a square box like PC Micro that looked like it came out, and you said that all the hardware was designed before the chip actually came out.
Right.
What's the scale on that? It was kind of hard to tell if we were looking at a refrigerator or
It was very
board
small.
cube or something.
It was only about this big.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, a roll of paper tape is this big.
I've actually seen one, yeah.
And on the there's one sitting right next to the computer. So if you go to my website, vintagecomputer.net, there's a whole section about it, and you could look at it that way if you wanted to get more details about it.
So even at a scale, I mean, because I looking along the timeline, looks like, I mean, that was a big leap to go to that size.
Yeah, it really is an unknown. Historically, it should be more famous than it is, because it covered the Intel 8080 was really the first serious microprocessor that really could do things, and the fact that this company recognized it, was in the business, used it. The thing that they didn't really see with this thing was, instead of making it a hobbyist computer, they made it an expensive diagnostic tool that you could use to do their job, which was what their focus was. So really, they had no interest in making games with it or any of that. It was a microcomputer, but it was focused on the mini computer support world.
Now you bring these back from the dead, and you power them up, and you make them living, and they're functional, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any concerns bringing them back up as far as dealing with low capacitors and things like that?
Yeah, it takes years to bring some of these back up again.
Wow.
I mean, what I do is I strip them down, and in fact, my entire website is all about how I step by step go through. I've done about 600 restorations of different things, or 500, and each one involves cleaning, how to clean them, how to test the capacitors, how to test the electric, the steps that you should take, the research you should take, and that's why it's so vital when you gather materials from somebody that donates a computer, that you get all of their stuff, because there might be some little scrap of paper that has the bootstrap on it, and that might be the only scrap of paper on earth that has that particular bootstrap. And some of the computers that I have are actually one of a kinds, or I've donated, or one of a kinds that you have to have that. So that's it's a labor of love, and it's like restoring old cars. It's the same basic.
Thanks.
Great talk. There were a lot of Hollywood movies in the 50s and 60s that portrayed banks of computer flashing lights and the whole thing. And
right.
I suspect that there was sort of an incestuous relationship in that people who were the decision makers, who didn't know anything about the tech side, figured that their computers should have that kind of display if they were going to buy them, and they should see what's going on. There should be some visibility.
Mm-hmm.
And the
kind of shows the brain thinking in a way. Yeah.
The computer makers probably adopted some of the Hollywood tropes from the from the set designers into their computers. So I'm sure there's a lot of back and forth, and some of the science fiction movies actually used old real computers that did have the flashing lights just to get that effect.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why a lot of people that are into the computer restoration hobby love the computers with the blinking lights. I mean, a lot of those are holy grails to get up and running again. Yeah.
Hi. On one of the Japanese calculators and also on the Singer calculator, the numeric display had curved numbers on it.
Nixie tubes.
So those are lights, or what are they?
I
can't tell from the picture. I don't know what that is.
They're special integrated circuits that predate LED. Yeah, they're like little almost like little light bulbs inside that are.
They're neon tubes.
Yeah, they're neon tubes.
All right, thank you.
A guy who's selling clock kits downstairs on the first floor.
And that's another thing that's a very retro thing that people really like a lot. Am I out of time? Any other questions?
So this is just a quick comment. As a Wikipedian, our point of view is basically the journalist point of view. So if you want to correct us, you would want to go to some place like Gawker or some tabloid type thing and just present your evidence.
So you're saying that I should take this to
some journalist, not us.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm really just.
All we do is just rewrite what Gawker and everyone else says. New York Times. There's no original research worth us.
Well, I want to point one thing out, is I don't really care what happens to Dan Aykroyd or any of those people. I just thought it was an interesting story to tell.
Yeah, it was.
I'm just a storyteller.
It's just a little nitpick.
Yeah, but you're right. Eventually I'll probably write this whole thing out and put it on my website or send it to somebody. Sooner or later, the story will get out, I'm sure. You know, if that's what I really want. I don't want Dan Aykroyd's lawyers knocking on the door, to be honest with you. You know, unless it's hush money in a suitcase. That's really what I should do, right? Okay, is that it? All right, thanks a lot.
Good morning. Well, it's noon here, actually. How many people are here for the keynote and they just want to see, oh, what's something else going on in here? A lot of people, I imagine. Most of you have been to Hope before and know who Steve Rombaum is. He has done some amazing solo talks. Look at this.
Moderate applause.
Amazing solo talks. He has one later this afternoon at 5 o'clock. Can't be missed. It's basically privacy is dead, get over it, but now they're going after anonymity. But this is his his renownedness has gotten him the attention of the TV channels. The Investigation Discovery Channel has done a reality TV show series. This is real reality, not the scripted stuff. And it's going to screen in August on the Investigation Discovery Channel, but the world premiere of it is right here now at HopeX. So we're going to see a 45-minute show showing something, showing a program about something that happened here at Hope number 6. Remember when Steve Rambam got arrested by the FBI at Hope? So you're going to understand what the backstory was and all this, how this happened, and some of the people involved on this are here in the front row. So Steve's going to explain all that, but you know who Steve is. You know he really knows what he's talking about. So I'll let Steve take it away.
This is going to be the shortest talk I've ever given at Hope. First of all, I do need to announce the show premieres August 4th, Investigation Discovery. It's every Monday night. It is a real reality show. This is, good God. Okay. Fortunately, I feel safe with you guys. This show will show how private investigators really work. The ups, the downs, the types of cases we handle, interaction with law enforcement. I just wanted to say, there is no other place that would have been suitable for me to premiere this TV show. First of all, I haven't seen this myself. It may suck, it may be embarrassing. I kind of want to do it with family, which after 20 years, you guys pretty much are. I mean, you're the weird first cousin with piercings that show up at Thanksgiving, but you're family. Second thing is, a key component of this case happened at Hope. I was about to go on stage with Rick Dakin and do my Privacy is Dead presentation, and a raid team of FBI, heavily armed FBI people, came in and pulled me off the stage. Now, I understand that I'm supposed to be magnanimous in victory, and I want to tell you at the end there was a real victory. One of the agents is now under federal indictment, 20-count indictment. Another one, don't applaud that, that's a sad thing. That's a sad thing. These are our guardians, and it's very depressing. And they're also nominally my colleagues. Another agent is about to be arrested. The 3 remaining agents in the squad were fired. Both federal prosecutors were returned to the private sector. It was a real victory. I know I'm supposed to be magnanimous in victory, and I'm told that I should not mention the agent's name, so today we will not mention that Special Agent Michael Grimm is part of this story and is now an indicted congressman. We won't mention that Special Agent Ted Cacioppi has been the last standing agent from the group, is now a member of the scuba unit. He was transferred to the scuba unit, so you know, he swims with the fishes, and I had to say that. I had to say that. What we're going to do is we're going to run this show. I haven't seen it. I hope to God it's as good as I expect. One reason why I did this show was because Investigation Discovery did it. They agreed to all of our requirements about protecting sources and confidentiality and treating investigation seriously, not like we're a bunch of dancing monkeys. This is going to be the real deal. After this, I have literally 5 minutes for Q&A. Discovery ID is going to be handing out a lot of swag, T-shirts and hats and whatever. I'm speaking from 5 to 8. Long talk. 45 minutes of it, yeah, okay, to be honest, half hour of it will be Q&A. If you have any questions that come to mind that you can't squeeze in after this presentation, ask me there. Come talk to me in the hall. I'll be around until very late tonight. So, as we professional TV guys say, roll 'em. All right, not a good song.
Spinning up.
Meet Franz Joseph von Habsburg-Lothringen, also known as the Prince of Austria. I first became aware of the prince when I was called in to help a young lawyer who was being charged with money laundering. The lawyer is facing hard time in prison. If I can't clear his name, his life will be destroyed. This case has gotten me more beers in more bars than any case before or since.
Turn around, put your hands behind your back, sir.
If this hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't have believed it myself. I've been a private investigator for 30 years. I take on the world's toughest cases, the ones the cops won't touch. I never give up, so you don't want me coming after you. I've worked on some crazy cases in my time, met some bizarre people, got into some scrapes. But nothing, and I mean nothing, can compare to the case of the Crown Prince of Austria. I got a call from Jack Littman, an attorney who was an old client of mine. He was representing a young lawyer, charged with money laundering and facing a sentence of 14 years. But according to Jack, he was completely innocent. He was young and naive, and he'd gotten himself in a lot of trouble. So I went to meet him and Jack and his assistant, Todd Terry.
Steve, good to see you again. How are you?
Doing great.
Great. You remember Todd?
Yeah.
Okay, I also want you to look at this.
There's something going on here. We need you to prove it.
So then I hear this crazy story. This young guy, working as a private attorney, is at one of his clients' nightclubs one evening, mixing business and pleasure.
Thank you so much for the drink.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
One of my clients, a young model that we helped with her immigration issues, she was owed money from some model agency. She invited me to come down and to celebrate her new job as a host in this nightclub.
So the lawyer's talking to this model when in struts this cartoon character, wearing a cape, wearing fine tailored clothes, and with this gorgeous Amerasian woman on his arm. I mean, practically a Bond villain.
They were a very, very impressive couple. He was dressed very eclectic and very esoteric and unusual.
He introduces himself as Franz Joseph von Habsburg-Lothringen, the Crown Prince of Austria.
The young model, he explained that he was Austrian royalty and that he lived in a $20 million apartment, and she was working as an au pair for him.
Guys, this is Spencer. This is the guy that helped me with all of my papers getting into the country. Oh. So he's done a lot for me.
And this fellow proceeds to start drinking cocktails and buying drinks for everyone.
He said, this young girl is like a daughter to him, and because I had helped her, as a result, he would like to get to know me and see if he can help me in a similar way. So we sat for probably